welcome to my webinar. I'm excited to share what I've learned about transforming special education results. So as we go along, you may have questions. Feel free to go ahead and post them in the Q&A. I'm not going to look at them because I would get distracted, but I will be looking at them at the end if we have time, and I'll get to as many of them as I can. So I understand also that some of you may be interested in professional development hours. I would be glad to send a certificate for 1 clock hour of time for anyone who stays until the end. And then if you email me, and I'll give you my email address at the end, although I think you've been getting emails from me. And since I'm talking about the end, I also want to tell you that I'm going to have a present, kind of a complimentary download that would be helpful for transforming special ed that will be for everybody who stays until the end. So let's get started. I think, first of all, let me tell you what's going to be included in this webinar. I think it's time for transformation. So much has changed since 1975 when we had the first special ed law. We know so much more now about learning. We're trying to prop up the special education bridge that it's still in the same format that it was back in 1975. And I think we need an overhaul. It is time for major changes. And I'm going to be sharing with you, first of all, 3 reasons for transforming inclusion, why we need to do that now in our country. Many of these reasons are probably familiar with you. 3 mistakes that I think schools make when they're trying to provide professional development and transform schools, and 5 keys that will make a difference with your special education results. So don't forget to stay till the end for that complimentary gift. Let's start with the first reason, special education staffing problems. There are some major national problems with special ed staffing. Does any of this sound like what you're facing? All 50 states have said that there is a shortage of special ed teachers. In fact, we've had a 17% drop of special educators since 2006. That's pretty significant drop. Yet the number of special education students has increased in the last 2 decades. So we need to do something about special ed staffing. Well, what do you think is the problem? We also have student-teacher ratio. In 2017, the special ed ratio of the number of special ed students assigned to a special educator has increased and has passed the ratio for special ed ratio with students, the number of students that teachers in general ed, the number of students they have, their ratio has decreased. And in 2015, the number of special ed, the ratio increased, is now greater. Think about that. A special educator who is responsible for individualized instruction has more students to focus on than a general education teacher. This is a problem. Special ed teachers are leaving at alarming rates. In surveys, special ed teachers who left the field cited a lack of mentoring, feeling overwhelmed, citing overwhelming paperwork, and a lack of respect. And there was also an issue about co-planning time. The Council for Exceptional Children sponsored a 4-year study of 10,000 special ed teachers. That study just ended this year in 2019, and 27% of the special educators reported they had no co-planning time with their co-teaching partners, and only 14% said they had sufficient time. So this is not going to help the special ed staffing problem. In that same study, only 34% of special educators said that they felt competent with the new special ed high leverage practices that were just released in 2017. So this means the special ed teachers, especially the ones that I have been working with, they have a pretty good instinct. They operate instinctively for this is what I think we ought to be doing with students, but they're not strategic. They don't understand the research, the brain research, and a lot of the strategies that have been proven to be effective. So how do we help special ed teachers feel more effective and feel more competent? And then there's the issue of families. Teachers reported they have very little support for family engagement, and on that site, that study that I cited earlier, only 27% reported that their district supported them in involving families in the IEP process. So in my opinion, the biggest problem with special ed staffing overall is that special educators don't have daily joy in their job. I know when I started as a special ed teacher, I loved what I was doing. I think teachers today don't have the satisfaction that keeps their fires lit, and I'd like to help change that. So let's look at the second reason why we need to change. Special ed staffing is one. The second is the Supreme Court decision. In March of 2017, the Andrew F. versus Douglas County Supreme Court decision ruling was about special education, and they used the Latin phrase de minimis. They said the minimum is no longer acceptable. Instead, special education must result in measurable educational benefit for the student. And that benefit, the appropriate progress in that benefit will be determined individually through that student's IEP, but that IEP has to be reasonably calculated to enable the child to make appropriate progress. The other aspect of Andrew F. is that parents need to be involved. They have to be involved in a meaningful way in the IEP development and process. So why is this important? The most recent analysis found that in the United States, districts spent roughly $146.5 million on mediation, due process, and litigation activities to settle disputes between parents and school districts regarding the provision of services for a child who has an individualized education program, these IEPs. These unproductive actions highlight the need for strengthening parent participation and reducing conflict in special ed. So the Supreme Court decision has changed the rules for what we expect a special educator to do, and it's costing school districts a lot of money. We need to get in there and transform special education practices. So let's look at the third reason why we need to transform. This reason has to do with employment rate. This graph that you're seeing is from the US Department of Labor. You can see the blue line, the employment rate for adults over 16 in the United States is fairly steady, but so is the rate for adults with disabilities. In fact, it is flatlined, around 20%. How can this be? We've had a special ed law since 1975, and we've had provided transition services since 1997. Well, one of the biggest factors, according to research, is social and behavioral issues on the job. But there's also research about employers revealing that most employers are uncomfortable hiring adults with disabilities. Most of them had little experience with exceptional peers when they were in school, and so they have difficulty, they're just not comfortable with hiring them. And so we see the employment rate being just unacceptable. Now, this Department of Labor records anyone who identifies as having a disability. So it could be medical, psychiatric, intellectual, a learning disability, physical disability. We're never going to achieve 100% employment of adults with disabilities, but we don't have that for individuals without disabilities. Most of these individuals are receiving disability benefits from the federal government. As taxpayers, we are bearing the burden. Is this the outcome you want for your current students? Only 1 out of 5 will be employed? We have to do something. So it's pretty clear. It's time for transformation. I probably didn't need to describe those 3 issues to you. If you're a school leader or a district special ed director, you're probably painfully aware of them. That's why you're on this call. You're looking for solutions. I believe special educators have big hearts and a passionate commitment, but the rickety bridge that we call special education needs help. These are confusing times, and I'm very concerned about the current state. I'm sure you are too. We need to create a special education delivery system for the future. There are lots of partial solutions. Each one says, try me. But if you're a busy educator or an educational leader, you probably don't have time to look into everything. That's why I created this webinar. I've invested my time and my energy into investigating so many initiatives. Over the last 10 years of on-site consulting in schools, I've educated myself by reading the research and soaking up wisdom from experts at professional conferences. I've experimented with solutions, and I've paid close attention to feedback from teachers and to school leaders. Now, I'm not trying to sell you something here. I want to help you build an updated special ed superhighway that meets your current and future needs. I can help you build a streamlined professional development approach for you and your teachers, leading to improved results for your students. Now, I've supported schools for many years. It's my hope and my commitment that you will succeed, but I can't, of course, promise your results. The changes that you need to make are not easy, and the 5 keys I'm going to give you won't work if inclusion is not a top priority for your school. If you have other priorities, you should go and do those. But when inclusion is a top priority, then changes can be made. This isn't for you if you want a quick fix solution. You're going to watch a 1-hour webinar and you're going to instantly be able to fix everything. That's just not reality. Most of all, it's not for you if you want to provide random isolated workshops and hope that teachers are going to figure it out on their own. That's like a Band-Aid approach. I've tried those things. They won't create lasting change, and they won't create the results that you want. So this workshop is for you if you're worried about the problems I've described. If you're concerned about the lawsuits, I hope they're not in your district, but maybe they are, coming out of the Supreme Court decision. But let's face it, those complaints are just a symptom that our system is not working. This workshop is for you if you want to change the working conditions for special educators so they can be more effective and so they will love their job. This workshop is for you if you agree with me we have to do something about the employment rate of adults with disabilities. I think we have to begin now to change the results for children with disabilities and all the adults in their network of support. So I created this workshop to speak to those of you who have a vision, a dream that we can do a better job with special education and that we have to do it now. Now, you may be wondering who I am. So let me tell you a little about myself. First, I love being in my garden. These are 2 shots from my garden. Just like school transformation, my garden's a long-term project. The work I do this week may not pay off until next season. It's awesome to celebrate the results in both, and I enjoy the process and the anticipation too. For the last 10 years, I have provided direct consulting to schools through my company, Inclusion Focused Coaching. I integrate inclusion, secondary transition, youth empowerment, family partnerships, all into one system. My commitment is to support schools as they transform inclusive practices, helping them to do their groundwork now. But I'm only one person, and there are so many schools. So I'm doing this webinar because I want to pass on my insights to you so you can have the rewards, and I still have time to enjoy my garden. So where did I begin? If you've ever wondered how to meet the needs of a classroom full of diverse learners, I know exactly how you feel. When I was an English teacher in the early 70s, there I am. Don't I look young? That's me and my drama club, by the way, back in that picture. But back then, I couldn't understand why all my students didn't learn everything I taught them. My mentor helped me view my struggling students as a challenge. He helped me experiment with materials and methods, and I experienced so much joy helping my struggling students become amazingly successful. I see very few teachers experiencing that joy today. We have to do something about that. Just after the first special ed law was passed, I earned certification in special ed and reading. I was selected to start a middle school program for 12 students in 3 middle school grades. I taught my students all 5 subjects. They had a variety of learning challenges, LD, ADHD, mild autism, TBI, and like these colored pencils, they did not line up easily. So I had to develop some management systems. These students didn't like school, and they told me so. They had developed behavioral habits to disguise their struggles. At the heart of it, they had accepted the belief that they couldn't learn. I was determined to change their mindset. So believe me, I know what it's like to be a teacher with a huge commitment who doesn't know where to start. Again, I used my network of support to problem solve. I went on to coordinate special ed services at a high school, but then I worried about the students who came back to visit years later who weren't prepared for college or the world outside of school. So I became a local transition coordinator, and I placed students out on jobs and connected them with vocational rehabilitation and disability services on college campuses. I soon discovered that these students didn't know how to talk about their disability, much less manage it. They didn't know how to advocate for themselves. They had become so accustomed to us adults providing a safety net of support that they really were ineffective out there in the world. So I went back to all the middle and high school teachers that I could get in touch with and encouraged them to build self-determination skills into every daily interaction with students. Midway through my doctoral program, I was appointed as the transition specialist for the Maryland State Department of Education. 3 months later, in 1997, the special education law was reauthorized and transition was now required in the IEP. I was in the right place at the right time, and I got to be part of a massive national systems change design process. I was fortunate to be part of the OSEP, that's the U.S. Office of Special Ed Programs, the OSEP think tank, where I got to rub shoulders with other state transition specialists and the leading experts in the country on transition. Across my state, I pulled together stakeholders and facilitated our brainstorming process. We launched all sorts of initiatives and learned so many lessons the hard way. By now, I had learned to benefit from the mistakes of others. I have never lost my transition lens. What is the point of special education service if, at the end, students aren't prepared to function as responsible adults? Then I was hired by Towson University to help design and then lead the special education graduate program. I reached out to those with expertise that I was missing. I invited them to educate me in areas where I had gaps. I brought my years of experience and my new doctorate in special education systems change into this project. I worked with trusted colleagues to develop courses that would give teachers the skills they would need for the world they were facing, a world I knew quite well. As I interviewed and admitted candidates into that master's program, I was reminded repeatedly of the special qualities that are deeply held in the heart of a special educator. I still believe today that every special educator has felt a calling, a strong desire to make a difference in the lives of children who struggle. Sometimes I think those teachers forget why they became teachers, and they need to be reminded. And we need to fix our systems so they can have the job satisfaction that will keep them going. Did I tell you I'm also the parent of 2 young adults who receive special education services? I don't know how many of you have experienced it, but IEP meetings look very different from the parent seat. The experience changed me. I was generally treated as an outsider, and I was expected to take a passive role oh yeah, in planning supports for my children. It became apparent that teachers didn't know my kids like I knew my kids. I resolved to fix that mistake too. So Donna Wandry at Westchester University and I published a book which the Council for Exceptional Children still calls their bestseller. I also continue to present new findings at a national conference. That picture on the right is me presenting at the Council for Exceptional Children conference in Indianapolis on building family partnerships. So I retired, but then I became the inclusion consultant at the University of Delaware, and I worked with school districts all over the state to establish strong inclusive practices, co-teaching, student-led IEPs, student ownership, family partnership. I was back in the classroom again, side by side with these teachers. I partnered with school leaders, learning so much about the critical elements that must be in place if professional development is going to make a difference. When we were missing just one of those critical elements, it really impacted our results. You're going to benefit from all I've learned. Since 2011, my company has provided consulting services to schools and districts across 6 states. One year, something happened that made me pause. I attended 2 conferences in the same week, one on inclusion, one on transition, in the same state. Transition wasn't mentioned at the inclusion conference, and inclusion wasn't mentioned at the transition conference. I looked around. I think I was the only one who attended both conferences. But aren't secondary teachers responsible for both? I wish that somebody would weave all the components of special education into one system. And then I remembered my grandmother used to say, if you want something done right, do it yourself. So I wrote another book, included with the end in mind, taking on my own challenge to integrate inclusion, differentiation, youth empowerment, self-determination, and family partnerships all into one system. It focused on preparing students with the skills they will need for a successful life after school. I truly believe that if we can do that, test scores will go up, but so will every other indicator that really matters. I can save you time, money, wasted effort. Over my career, and especially the last decade, I've learned a lot. I've tried a number of approaches with varying degrees of failure. Those failures were really valuable. I've learned from my mistakes, but I've also learned from the mistakes of others. That's the definition of wisdom, right? We don't have to make all the mistakes ourselves. In fact, I hope you're going to learn from my mistakes. I think we make 3 types of mistakes. I'm going to use the same terms that you hear in the technology industry: input, processing, and output. First, input. That is, what do we include? What's the input we give to teachers in our in-service professional development, and how is it delivered? I think the real problem is that special education has not been approached systematically. I've seen schools provide an array of workshops on a variety of topics, especially in that week before school starts, and then we expect teachers to integrate it all. We all know that sit and get workshops don't make teachers more effective, but why? It's because the information won't solve the problem. The issue isn't information. A lot of teachers have heard the information, yet schools still ask me to provide one workshop on differentiation or co-teaching or youth empowerment. We have to integrate our priorities into one school improvement initiative and encourage teachers to build new skills on top of the ones they learned last month. When I finish a workshop and teachers come up to talk to me, the worst thing they can say is, "That was interesting." I don't want to be interesting. I want to help them become more effective. So what about processing? We know how important it is to give students opportunities to process new information, to add it into the schema in their brains. How about teachers? Do we expect teachers to process the information and embed it into their instructional routines? We don't tell students everything about Algebra 1 on the first day of class, and we don't say, now practice all year. If you want to become an athlete in any sport, you won't become proficient because you listen to somebody explain the game or the moves to you. You need to practice. Athletes, teachers, and students all need practice, putting that cutting edge information into practice. Now listen, I have a lot of respect for the power of habits that are already established. We all are hesitant to try something new. Teachers are no different. They're human. We'll need opportunities where it's safe to become a novice at something. Teachers will need to know clearly what they are expected to do, that it is safe for them to experiment, and it's safe to start figuring out how to make a new strategy part of their routine toolbox. So what about output? Again, I think schools drop the ball. They don't monitor whether teachers practice, and they don't assess whether teachers are gaining any proficiency in that practice. Frequently following a workshop, I'm excited when I learn that teachers experimented once or twice. We know that to develop a new behavior into a habit, though, you need ongoing practice. What do they say, 10,000 hours to mastery? But there's a difference between doing the same thing over and over for 10,000 hours and having feedback so that there's growth over that 10,000 hours. We assess students and give them feedback, right? So their practice improves over time. If we want teachers to become more proficient, we have to give them feedback and an opportunity to practice. If we really want to transform special ed, we have to avoid these 3 mistakes. Before we get to the 5 keys, let's pause a moment to consider the purpose of special education. The special education law clearly states that the purpose is to provide free, appropriate public education designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. But what vision do we have for what's possible when we prepare them for their future? Do we hold high expectations for all students? Underneath all our work, we have unconscious assumptions about what's possible. Let's consider the word disabilities. The word itself focuses on the things the kids can't do, right? Dis. How difficult their problems are, how insurmountable our challenges are as a system working with students to help them overcome their disabilities. We focus on the dis side of disabilities. Instead, what if we looked at their abilities rather than their deficits? What if we focused on what they do right and what we're doing right? And what if we do more of that? What if we looked at the assets our teachers bring to the table and their amazing hearts for kids? And then let's take it one step further and explore possibilities. What if we made our special education support strength-based? Are we focusing on problems or solutions? What if teachers believed that every problem had a solution? What if teachers saw students as a riddle to solve so that we could help them strengthen their abilities? What if we built alliances with families to achieve possibilities? What if your special education support system was grounded in possibilities rather than focused on disabilities? Imagine if your faculty became aware of unconscious limiting assumptions that are present in their students, their families, their colleagues, in their procedures, and in themselves, and they were able to move past them. Imagine if special education services were fully organized and seamlessly integrated within your instructional and behavioral frameworks of your school, rather than some add-on. Imagine if your special and general educators were clear about their collaborative teaching roles and they regarded each other as valued members of the team. Imagine if your professional learning communities had the vocabulary and the strategic tools so teachers routinely supported each other to expand their effectiveness with co-teaching. Imagine if parents partnered with you, reinforcing I can messages that teachers gave students. And then finally, imagine if your students with disabilities graduated high school prepared to live a fulfilling life that included further education and careers. These are all possible. Let me tell you, I have an unfair advantage. I've been in this education business for a long time. This fall, it will be 50 years. I've already made so many mistakes. I've had multiple opportunities to learn the hard way that I'd like to share with you. So let's move into the 5 keys that will transform your special education results if you put them into practice. As I work in schools, I see many teachers have strong instincts, but they don't have the latest information to be strategic. I see other teachers who are confused about what they should be doing. We can address all these problems. So now, first key, integrate initiatives and expectations. Leaders need to be the ones doing this. They need to integrate everything by their words and their actions. Let me tell you about an event that crystallized my thinking about this. I was setting up to do a workshop, and I struck up a conversation with teachers as they came into the room. I asked how many initiatives their school was working on this year, and the teachers started counting them off. Common Core, trauma-informed instruction, multicultural awareness, response to intervention, positive behavior supports, data-based decision-making, and now my workshop. Then they thought of some others, and they soon ran out of fingers. And what struck me is they saw each one as a separate initiative. I asked how they could possibly implement all those initiatives, and they responded, oh, They don't expect us to implement everything. We just have to attend the workshop. What? What's the point? What are we doing? I hope this isn't what goes on in your school. Teachers' top priority is to teach their students using strong, rigorous lessons and assessing their progress. They don't have the time or their energy to consider how to integrate all our initiatives into their current practices. So now when I'm strategizing with the school, I ask if inclusion is a top priority. I invite school leaders to consider how to integrate approaches for students with disabilities into their other priorities. They need to put the pieces together, or at least create a frame for assembling the puzzle. And then I encourage the principal to communicate clear expectations to teachers. Here's what we expect you to learn from this professional learning experience. Here's what we expect you to do with what you learn. Here's what we'll look for in formal observations and informal walkthroughs. If you skip this step, you might as well not offer the professional development. In my experience, most teachers will respectfully listen, and then they'll close their doors and do what they've always done. Because when there's so many pieces to the puzzle, it's easier to not even try. I don't blame them. It's a pretty smart coping strategy. I worked in a school where the principal announced that all the teachers were required to watch a set of videos that I had created on co-teaching structures, and then post their personal reflections, their takeaways from the video, and what they would put into practice. In that school, 3/4 of the co-teaching pairs were experimenting with a new co-teaching strategy the next week when I visited the school. This first key makes such a huge difference. Your teachers will thank you for telling them what the priorities are. Okay, second key, clarify teacher roles. Now, special education, as I mentioned in the beginning, is changing rapidly. Research has expanded our understanding of the learning process, and the Supreme Court decision has changed the rules. University programs like the one I directed just 10 years ago didn't prepare special education for their roles today. We didn't see these changes coming. The Council for Exceptional Children is in the process of rewriting standards for special educator preparation. And as the standards change, university programs will change. But what about all the teachers who are out in the field right now? There is a lot of confusion. I hear comments like the principal who said, I'm not sure what our special educators should be doing, but I'm pretty sure it's not what I just saw in that classroom. Or the general educator who said to me, she's my peer, another certified teacher. I shouldn't be telling her what to do in my classroom. Or the special educator who shared, he's teacher of the year. I don't want to interrupt him when he's teaching. And another special educator who told me, I think I'm okay as long as I get my IEP goals written on time and none of my students fail. There's so many misconceptions, and we expect teachers to figure it out. Well, I really believe that if teachers knew what to do, they'd be doing it already. We need to make sure they have the information and the clear direction they will need to grow their competencies. Both general and special educators need specific expectations for how they will be evaluated, and it has to go beyond test scores. I've learned to have a strategy session with principals before I provide professional development to help them iterate their expectations. That provides a favorable context for our work together. Have you stated what you expect from special educators and their general education partners? By the way, if the principal states the importance of special educators' contributions to instruction and then polls them when substitute teachers aren't available, they're sending a double message. Teachers have complained to me that they are given time to plan with their co-teaching partners. They develop creative lesson plans that will draw on the expertise of both teachers, and then they learn that the special educator is going to be pulled to substitute. How discouraging. Third key, provide coaching support. Once teachers are clear about their roles and they have cutting-edge information about new strategies, we need to give them coaching support. First, they have to try a strategy, and then they have to adapt it to fit their own personalities and their co-teacher style and the content they teach and the needs of their students. What works in one situation won't work exactly the same in another. Incidentally, the lady in white and blue was a principal right in there beside her teachers in our workshop, learning and reinforcing the importance of experimenting with new approaches. But how do we get them to keep practicing? In my experience, the best way to keep the momentum going is through a coach, someone to give them encouragement, feedback, and the next step along the way. Successful athletes and business professionals use coaches. The practice of school-based literacy coaches and math coaches is spreading, and it's being documented in the professional literature. For the last 10 years, I've been an inclusion coach. Now I've developed a support system to support inclusion coaches. Experience as a strong special educator is a critical foundation, but it doesn't mean that someone has the skills to coach their colleagues. People who are the best coaches know the importance of continuing their professional learning. If you have inclusion coaches in your district, yay for you, but do you have a system for expanding their competencies? So the fourth key, monitor progress. Now, it may surprise you to know I'm not talking about students here. We have well-developed systems in place to monitor the progress of students in every classroom, on statewide and local testing. In many places, student progress is one component of a teacher's evaluation. No. I'm asking here, how do we measure teachers' progress with their professional growth? After your workshop on a new strategy, do you have a system in place to measure whether teachers are implementing the new approaches? It's a bit harder with inclusion because we aren't asking teachers to implement a one-size-fits-all approach. They need to adjust each strategy to their students and their course content. So how are we going to measure progress with inclusive practices? Schools need a tool for measuring inclusive practices, like the rubric that I developed for inclusion rounds. Then school leaders can quantify indicators of inclusive practices in the form of graphs. When these data are shared with teachers, the principal can underscore the message about his and her expectations for implementation. So the fourth key is to develop a systemic way to measure teachers' progress with their professional strategies. Fifth key, and this is the best, celebrate growth. I firmly believe that every member of a school faculty came into the profession because they craved the satisfaction of making a difference. That's probably why you are still seeking ideas and why you're on this webinar. Maybe they want to teach them about their subject, or maybe they want to equip them to have productive, successful lives, or maybe both. But how often do they get acknowledged for what they do? During Teacher Appreciation Week? I hope that's not all. The principal of this high school, I'm sorry it's a fuzzy picture, it was from an old cell phone, but the principal of this high school clearly understood the value of celebrations. She announced a Sweet Endings faculty meeting in May. Each team was expected to report what they had learned with their case study special education student that they had selected for our initiative. Some reported the variety of ways they individualized their instruction and the great gains the student had made. Other teams shared that their student wasn't a success story yet, but that they still celebrated all they had learned in the process. If you look closely at the picture, you'll see desserts on the nearby table. That's fitting for a Sweet Endings faculty meeting. The principal ended the meeting by acknowledging the persistence and resourceful brainstorming she had witnessed over the course of the initiative. Teachers were inspired to keep going. Of course, it doesn't have to be a party. There are plenty of ways to celebrate. A simple thank you note or a positive mention in your faculty meeting would go a long way. Schools that regularly celebrate have more teacher satisfaction and much less burnout. Think of the impact this would have on teacher shortage. Think of the last time you were appreciated and how much it meant to you. So I've just shown you the 5 keys that I've personally used in schools to transform inclusion. You heard how it works and how I've done it. Hopefully, you can see that it makes sense. If you are someone committed to building a system of strong inclusive practices, you might be wondering now about the future of your school and how you can implement those 5 keys yourself. If you'd like me to personally help you implement everything we've gone over today, I'd be excited to talk about possibilities. But first, I did promise you a gift if you stayed until the end. So I want to tell you about that now. Each of you who attended this webinar will have a thank you email with 2 links. First of all, it will have a link to the replay of this webinar in case there's someone else that you think should see my message. This would be a great way to establish a network of support for your school. And I want to say thank you in advance for forwarding it to them. Secondly, you will have a link to my inclusion readiness checklist that schools have found useful. It evaluates 21 indicators and divided into 5 different domains. This tool is designed as a framework for you and school leaders to evaluate the current practices in your school. Where are you on the journey to having an effective inclusion model? What are the critical indicators that you already have in place? And what do you need to change before you can move forward with transforming your practices? But that's not all. I've also set aside some time to talk with a few people who are serious about transforming their special education results. It is completely free of charge, comes with no obligation. I call it a possibility call. Here's what would happen on this possibility call if you want to schedule one, and there is a link for scheduling it. I will ask you what you learned about your school from the Inclusion Readiness Checklist, and we'll discuss your areas of strength and your concerns. My commitment will be to help you discover a way that you could apply my 5 keys to your school or your district. I want you to have a breakthrough in your thinking so you could develop a strategic plan for expanding the effectiveness of your inclusive practices. On this call, if you see the value of working together, we can discuss what that might look like, and I might invite you to become a client. And then if we do decide to work together, we'll begin our work immediately to get you to your goal. But if we don't decide to work together, that's okay too. I'm more interested in helping you have a breakthrough. But I do have some requirements for this call. It's not for everyone. I've set aside time in the next 2 weeks to talk with 2 kinds of people. First is a school leader or an influencer, like a principal, a superintendent, a district superintendent, a specialist, someone who has influence over the direction the school is going to take related to inclusion. And the second type is an inclusion coach. This might be somebody who is an experienced special educator who's worked in inclusive settings. And as you've listened to me, you feel a strong commitment to expanding your competencies and your influence, and you would like to help influence school inclusion. Either way, I'd like to talk with those of you who want to transform school-based inclusive practices. So you can book your possibility call now. We know what happens when we plan to do something later. And then you want to complete that school readiness checklist ahead of time so we can use that as the starting point of our conversation. On our call, you have to be willing to brainstorm, to think outside the ways you've always done things. And then now another thing you can consider is whether you want to invite any of your key leaders to be on the call with us. I'm going to leave that up to your discretion. My goal will be for you to have a breakthrough, for you to see new possibilities. Incidentally, if you're not one of those 2 kinds of people, but you've stayed on the webinar this long, it's probably because you care deeply about the state of inclusion in your school. So maybe you know someone who is a school leader or a decision maker. Feel free to share my email message and the recorded webinar with them. You may wonder why I'm doing this. Why am I giving up free time to have conversations with people? You heard me talk in the beginning about these 3 challenges we face today: the employment rate of adults with disabilities, the Supreme Court decision, and the issues with special education staffing. All schools need to address these challenges, and now. I hope you can move forward using the 5 keys I discussed today to transform your inclusive practices. I'm offering these calls. I want to be of service. So many people have contributed freely to my growth and development over the years. This is my way of giving back. I also want you to implement what I showed you today without wasting precious time and money, so you can start transforming your schools right away. So, if you're a school leader or an inclusion coach in the making, book your call now before all the spots are taken. You don't have to lift that boulder of transforming special education all by yourself. That's my husband pretending to hold up that huge boulder. But seriously, those of you who really care about transforming practice need to band together. I would be excited to talk with you. Now, spaces are limited, and if you book your call now, then you'll have a deadline to complete your inclusion readiness checklist. If you're busy like me, you need deadlines. Every time I offer these personal calls, they book up quickly, and I only have a small number available in the next 2 weeks. Let me end with a thank you for your commitment to children with special needs. I have so much respect and admiration for those of you who choose this work. It's time for us to transform our system of service delivery so that teachers have daily job satisfaction. Together, we can improve national employment statistics. Wouldn't you like to be part of a community that started having breakthroughs in the next school year? So look for my email shortly, later this afternoon, and use my inclusion readiness checklist to start some meaningful conversations. But don't wait. Go ahead and book a call with me. I really hope I get to talk personally with you.